Welcome to our channel. Here we read Bible stories written for children and adults alike. Our verse today is Genesis 50:20a. Ye thought evil against me, but God meant it for good. Our story today is called From Prison to a Palace, taken from Genesis 39-41. When the Ishmaelite traders arrived in Egypt, they quickly found a buyer for poor Joseph. He became the slave of Potiphar, who was captain of the guard of the Egyptian king Pharaoh. Now Joseph worked well, and the Lord blessed all that he did, so that Potiphar soon put him in charge of all the other slaves. But then came trouble. Potiphar's wife tried to make Joseph do something very wrong, something that was so wrong that if Potiphar had found out, he would have been frightfully angry. Joseph would not do it, but Potiphar's wife grabbed hold of his coat to try to force him. Joseph slipped out of his coat and ran from the room. But unfortunately, Potiphar's wife was a very bad woman. When Potiphar came home, she told him that Joseph had wanted to do a wrong thing and had run away only when she shouted for help. Potiphar was very angry and immediately had Joseph thrown into prison without even hearing his side of the story. Now, even in prison, Joseph knew God's blessing. The jailer saw that he was not like the other prisoners. Before long, although he was a prisoner, he became the under-jailer. One day, two new prisoners arrived. One was Pharaoh's chief butler, the other his chief baker. Both of them had failed to do their work properly, and the king was angry with them. They were placed in Joseph's charge. Now one night, each of them had a dream. When Joseph came into their cell in the morning, they were both very sad because they did not know what their dreams meant, and they did not know who could tell them. The butler had seen a vine, and the vine had 3 branches. Then he saw those branches producing bunches of ripe grapes. He went and took those grapes and pressed out their juice into Pharaoh's cup, which he had in his hand. Then he gave the cup to Pharaoh. Joseph explained the dream to him. The 3 branches were 3 days. In 3 days' time, Pharaoh would take him out of prison and give him back his job. Joseph asked the butler, when he received back his high post, to remember him and ask Pharaoh to release him as well, because he had done nothing wrong. Then came the baker's turn. He had seen himself carrying 3 white baskets on his head, one on top of the other. In the top basket there were all kinds of cakes and baked food, but the birds flew down and ate them. The meaning of this dream was not so pleasing. The answer would come in 3 days, but the baker would be hanged from a tree, and the birds of the air would eat his flesh. But though the butler had found happiness again after his imprisonment, he forgot all about Joseph, who was still in prison. Let's repeat our verse. Genesis 50:20a. Ye thought evil against me, but God meant it for good. This verse is the Romans 8:28 of the Old Testament. And we know that all things work together for good, to them that love God, to them who are the called according to his purpose. What did we learn from this story? Joseph worked hard as a slave, therefore God blessed him. Potiphar made Joseph in charge of all of his house. Potiphar's wife tried to get Joseph to sin, and Joseph said no. Joseph was wrongfully imprisoned, but he continued to work hard and do his best, even in prison. The Pharaoh's butler and baker were thrown in prison when Joseph was, and both of them had dreams. God blessed Joseph by giving him special wisdom and understanding regarding the dreams. Joseph asked the butler to remember him to the Pharaoh. I'm going to ask a few questions now. I'll give you a few seconds to think about it, and then I'll reveal the answer. You ready? Number 1. What did the Ishmaelites do with Joseph? They sold him to Potiphar. Number 2. What did Potiphar do with Joseph? He put him in prison. Number 3, what did the dreams of the butler and baker mean? Joseph explained to the butler that he would return to his position with Pharaoh, but the baker's dream foretold he would soon be hanged. And lastly, number 4, what did Joseph ask the butler to do for him? Joseph asked the butler to remember him when he returned to his position. Joseph's life teaches us that bad things happen to God's children, but they can actually work out for good. Being a prisoner certainly wasn't good. Joseph's work ethic and relationship with God resulted in God working on his behalf. Thank you for joining us on our Bible reading journey. I hope you can join us next week as we continue our story in the next installment, which is called Pharaoh's Dream.